Welcome, everyone, to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle sponsored by Still and Moving Center, in which we take up a topic for general conversation amongst ourselves to bring forth the wisdom that each of us has from within. Today's topic is going to be envy to magnanimity, both of which are perhaps terms that we don't use that much in daily life, especially this term magnanimity. Carolyn Dorrance is our presenter for today, and this whole conversation called Gems from the Wisdom Traditions is really inspired by the Institute of World Culture in Santa Barbara, which is devoted to lifelong learning from all the many different cultures of the world. And so when we were in the middle of COVID and we were able to reach people beyond our sphere locally in Honolulu, it seemed like a wonderful opportunity for us to take up such a study. The person who was the president of the Institute of World Culture for several decades is Carolyn Dorrance, and she's here with us. And I have so much admiration for her for all the amazing programming and events that she oversaw at the Institute during her tenure. But in addition to that, she's a lifelong professor. She has taught especially history. She's also taught philosophy, including world religions, and she's also taught political science from the perspective of international relations. And so she's really very equipped to just think about a topic very deeply. And I think that's the real essence of philosophy in daily life. So from what I understand, she has taken this idea of envy to magnanimity, and especially what is magnanimity and how does it work? And she's just given it deep philosophical consideration. So we're so pleased to have you with us, Carolyn, and we're going to let you take it away now.
Well, this may be the shortest history and philosophy talk that you've ever been through. So, but if I go too fast, then you can wait me to slow down. I think we'd agree that this is a pretty terrible time around the world, that there's so much suffering, so horrific treatment of people, so much deprivation of food, health, and not to speak about the horrible wars. So some people think that that's because this is the end of a cycle that saw the emergence of so-called the modern age. And if so, when was the beginning of the cycle? Well, you could say 500 years ago, 1500, and that and a lot of things have happened since then. So we're going to highlight them in relation to two qualities. In the middle of all the turbulence, which I'm not going into, of the last 500 years, some new thinkers emerged. In time, they were called political philosophers. Some of them you've heard of, like John Milton, John Locke, the so-called father of the American Revolution. There were several who sprung up, Frenchmen, Dutchmen, like Spinoza, and they took advantage of the new breakthroughs in printing presses at the beginning of the 17th century, and they wrote books. And they had no social class, no positions, but what they saw was a complete failure of government, of monarchy, of the feudal system that had dominated European economy for almost 1,000 years. So they said, we got to take a different approach. And their different approach um, was to say, don't look to institutions for good ideas or law and order or whatever. They have no legitimacy or authority in themselves. The only thing that is real and is a source of everything that exists is nature. And so they wrote about the state of nature. And they didn't agree. Some thought nature was just a beneficent, fertile reality from which everything emerged, and had a positive attitude. Others had a very negative attitude. Thomas Hobbes was famous for his phrase that nature and life is just full of is nasty, and is full of destructive impulses. So you had, and others later began to write novels. It wasn't just for political philosophy, in which they would highlight some particular um, character. Poetry, like Shelley's poetry. And let's not forget that at this time, Shakespeare's plays were being performed daily, where hundreds of people could gather and listen to stories that revealed human mistakes, human values. So there was something of a cultural renaissance going on, even though the politics was pretty destructive. During this 500 period, 2 kings and 1 queen were beheaded. So that's pretty radical. There were 4 countries along the coast of England that were ready to invade. But it was talking about the state of nature. And that said, oh, we got to talk about human beings in that state of nature. So you started having questions about the nature of human beings. And that this as a new methodology for studying um, the circumstances you lived in, the state of nature and the nature of human beings. And then the question came, well, what are the qualities of human beings? What are their root qualities? And people chimed in, wrote books, wrote poetry to try to emphasize what that was. And what they came up with a very fertile spectrum of human qualities like patience and tolerance, and most of all, reason, that they had reason. But they discovered that every human being had um, a unique collection of qualities. It meant no human being was alike. Everyone was an individual. So individuality became an assumption, even though it kind of got complex. And the collection of qualities in any human being came to be labeled their character. And for 2 centuries, the word character was used. Today we think more in terms of personality, and that's an influence of psychology. So every individual has a unique mixture of qualities. So there's diversity, and you wonder, well, how can they going to communicate if they're all so different? How are they going to get along? It did lead to some concern for individual rights. And a lot of their ideas came alive in the American Revolution. So we're talking about a tendency, in a sense, you've just got to wipe away everything but nature, natural law, and the nature of each human being. Now, in this great array of exploration to try to understand the character of a human being, There were, courage, patience. We could make a long list, but our task today is simpler. We're going to look at two characteristics of human nature that were hit upon. One, magnanimity, and the other, envy. And you might think, well, they're kind of opposite, aren't they? They're both part of what we might call a middle level of human consciousness. They're not expressions of the highest spiritual reality, and yet they're not just grounded in the physical level of experience. So you get kind of a middle ground, and this whole discussion takes place, and it goes on for centuries and still going on, except the social psychologists and statistics have taken over the task. So let's first look at magnanimity, break it down linguistically. Magna, great, and animus, which was they borrowed from the classics, has multiple definitions, but the one I like kind of was soul forward. So magnanimity meant someone with greatness is moving forward. It suggests leadership, progress, loving kindness that the Dalai Lama uses. But the word that comes up the most in relation to magnanimity is generosity. Magnanimity means generosity, feelings of giving, feelings that are spontaneous, that are result of creative effort, although it takes years of effort, it seems, to actually become magnanimous. It involves, it's as written about and spoken about, a commitment to helping others, maybe first at a very family level, local level, but ultimately, it is hoped that we can develop a commitment to serving all of humanity. And this takes, again, insight into the needs of others. That was very important to them in the context and the violence and disturbance and all of that they were experiencing. They wanted leaders, and these are not political leaders. These are leaders in the community who have an insight for recognizing what the needs of other people are, and that they'll learn by trying to help, and they'll recognize the unity of all life. And so this unity is something that goes beyond the diversity of human beings. And so no matter how individual someone is, they're still part of a greater unity. And that unity is grounded in nature, and that can't be undone. And they also began to bring up the idea of natural law. So even though you're an individual with a diverse set of character traits, you still are dependent upon nature for your potential, for your values, your experience. So that was also, magnanimity was a measure of how we treat other people. It's a measure of our speech, and it can be expressed both in thought and in action. You can see, again, that kind of spontaneity that people feel when they're around a person who has achieved this level of perfection, who has to take on, through self-sacrifice, an an impersonal kind of beingness to themselves. They must go beyond, a magnanimous person goes beyond particular circumstances, um, engages in genuine learning, not just quoting from an ancient text or a religious text, but you actually do learn through immersion, you might say, in the circumstances that you have, including your relations with thousands of human beings. You have to be plunged in, you might say, to a kind of an ocean of learning, and there also discover, experience new possibilities. So, if you ever listen to yourself or someone else who said, I've never met, I had a phone call um, not too long ago with a woman who was in Guatemala. She was working for AOL, and I said, Guatemala, I've never spoken, and I had the same experience when you first engaged with somebody who's from Romania. That's part of the expansion of our consciousness, that is necessary to become magnanimous. Um, so I think that's kind of an outline. The question is, how do we learn or develop generosity? Think about that question, because I'm going to ask you to answer it in 15 minutes. How do we develop generosity? Well, some would say it's from our parents. When mom says to Harry, don't hit your brother, or don't break that toy. And later, when they're a teenager, mom and dad are still trying to give lessons to their children. It might be grandparents, it might be givers, it might be teachers. And the teachers in second grade are going to have different lessons to teach you than the teachers in high school. But that there are those there. Now, this came at a time when there was the theory that John Locke put forth, that when a baby was born, had no knowledge whatsoever. This would be contrary to those who believe and maybe have experienced reincarnation and know that they've lived before and that they've acquired knowledge. That's kind of part of the question mark. But think about it. How do you learn or develop generosity? What would be, if you were queen for a day, what would you suggest? If you also learn through a lifetime of observation and self-correction, and you may come to be a very generous person, but maybe it takes 40, 50 years for you to learn enough lessons. And there's inspirational sources. It might be spiritual books. It might be just a movie that really struck you. There's specific media that may encourage you. So that's part of, I think, our charge right now is, how do we encourage the development and the expression of generosity? Looking at envy, you're going to the kind of an opposite pole, where there's a negative opinion of someone or circumstances. And it's relational in a way, because envy usually has a specific focus that has produced discontent, resentfulness, jealousy, a tendency to blame others. The sources of envy are actually multiple, complex, intense, shrouded in rationalizations. They may be buried or being fed by particular past experience or something like that. There's blindness in perception. There's actually, some would say, darkness in with the lack of spiritual light or intellectual light in your individuality. But the most important problem with envy is that it encourages this focus on deprivation. It encourages a retreat into I-ness. I was hurt by this. I was deprived of this. Or my son didn't get any scholarship, but the neighbor's son, who's kind of a drip, I think, did get the scholarship. Or you can all go down the list. So a sense of separateness is what emerges with envy. And you can see that's completely the opposite from magnanimity, which embraces all. So their alienation's another result from envy. You find fault with others. And there's no light from higher sources or even recognition that there are higher sources usually. You really plunged into darkness. Somebody has taken something from you and you think it's unfair. And it can go so far, this envy, that it creates a desire for retribution. Well, I'm going to get him or her, or even worse, revenge. And we sometimes hear of awful things like somebody deliberately going over and wanting to shoot somebody to death out of revenge for what they think they did. So the question becomes, how do you move out of envy? Is there some kind of remedy? Can the generosity and magnanimity transform the negative attitudes and envy into humanitarian services? Well, we tried to think of some remedies, and you may have some other ways to answer that question. Usually you have a friend or so who's going to say, well, what you should do, you think that you've been wronged or the other person's done something that is destructive to you. You've got to see the goodness in what your nemesis is trying to do. Consider their motive. Perhaps they had a very good motive. They just didn't have the wisdom to find a good way to tell something to somebody or to do something that they think is necessary. So that's one way. Try to find the goodness in whatever it is that's your nemesis. Another suggestion, recognize the interdependence of the situation. Every situation has multiple sources of thought and action. And there can be a lot of confusion as who did what and why they did it or whatever. So instead of getting bogged down in one limited explanation of things, seek the unity in existence. And that's something that a magnanimous person knows how to do, is to see the unity in the human situation despite the diversity of people and circumstances. Recognize that there are natural laws that you must seek and follow. So seek the truth, seek universal law, or if you want to say, seek the karma in the situation. And that's, again, could be a very big challenge. Learn from wrongdoing. You make mistakes. Okay, you made a mistake. So then maybe you don't have to kind of go into a kind of a hate trip just because you were involved in a mistake and you don't want to admit it. Don't make the situation worse by immersion in it. That's the path to evil. And this whole, you might say that there's maybe more people who aren't magnanimous than there are who are, if you want to get into a statistical thing. But that's not the point. The point is to clarify the vision of that quality and make it part of your character. And recognize that there's always a better way in action, goals or circumstances. So those are some recommendations that one could work on in order to reduce envy and at least try to renovate yourself into better qualities. Because what is missing from those remedies that I've just reviewed? And the answer is you. Um, what about the inner, recognizing the need for some honest self-examination? In a positive way, recognize your potential to rise in consciousness to higher planes of thought and feeling. Um, it takes awakening confidence. A lot of problems come from a sense of insecurity because people haven't gone within and recognized that they have inner insights, inner potential, inner ability to think things through, etc. Than they realize. And when this self-examination involves looking for your own mistakes, but recognize that you have higher qualities and access to spiritual light and moral knowledge. And recognize that you can move from better to best. See the goodness and harmony through impersonality of your inner self. Um, that's all part of it. And focus on alternative values, such as magnanimity, but it could be tolerance, it could be courage. So, couldn't you become a very generous person, a person of self-sacrifice, um, and not sacrificing really the negative tendencies within yourself? So that going within and doing honest and self-examination is part of is a major part of um, destroying the envy that you tend to have, and to work towards a ladder of upward um, ability in thinking about things and come closer to the sources of knowledge and rightness that are of a higher quality, and at least put you on in the direction of becoming generous rather than pushing yourself down further into the darkness of envy. So um, um, we'll leave it there for you to have your questions or your suggestions. How do you become generous? And um, kind of really, how do you become destructive? And envy is just one of the negatives. It's the one we were given to kind of get some understanding of. But there are other qualities that have slipped in there that you need to take the measure of, and realize that maybe conversation with others, communication with others is at stake. So that's part of the path, you might say, to learning how to be generous. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Carolyn. Yes, I think that conversation with others is exactly what you're opening us up for right now. Beautiful, beautiful talk. The way that you unfolded Western history for us was really quite brilliant. I have, I've never heard it presented in that way, and um, all those years of study that you've done just made that an illuminated opening for us to understand this modern age and how it seems like to me um, people began looking for a leader who didn't just hold a certain position that was either God given or somehow given through heredity. Um, and that this was an age where we were going to have a different sort of leadership.
Mhm. Mhm.
And we wanted to have leaders of magnanimity. Is what I'm hearing from you. Um, and on the other side, we have this characteristic of envy, which I wish I could remember the source. I read recently that envy could be considered one of the worst of human qualities. Not It's not just that we are jealous of someone else and we wish that we had what they had. We actively wish that they did not have it.
Mhm.
We want to pull them down because they
Mhm.
have something that we feel that we do not have. So there is a line in Shakespeare, and he's talking about this whole progression of kind of moral decline that an individual can go through. And he ends with um, the idea that someone last eats up themselves from within. And I think that's something about that quality of envy. It becomes so consuming
Mhm.
that um, in their selfishness, they've actually, kind of eliminated all that is best in being a human being.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
The stress on that, and this is what was brilliant about these thinkers of the 17th, 18th century, and in a sense, it was it carried into to some degree the American Revolution, is actually thinking we can come better than that. Can be better than that, and believe in it. And the worst thing, I mean, I've heard people say something like, I wish you were dead, because they think that would be a way to get rid of the problem. And they wouldn't get rid of the problem because they're the problem, at least in part to some situation.
right. And
Um,
I thought you brought up something also brilliant when you suggested that perhaps the cure for envy might be to look deep enough within, and rather than being so outwardly focused on someone else and what they have and that you don't have, look within oneself and recognize one's own self-value.
yeah.
And that just seems to me to be pivotal in
Yeah.
terms of the ability to make that change, is to really see that. And this has to do with what it means to be a human being, doesn't it? Like you were talking about, what is human nature? And to look and see that it is possible for a human being to have this great, um, I don't think a person of magnanimity has a huge amount of self-doubt. I think they're a person that has a certain degree of self-confidence, that knows that they are capable of acting with forgiveness, for example. I think that's another one of the qualities of a magnanimous person, is that they can be affronted with, really terrible acts against them, and they're still able to forgive and move on. So finding what it is in ourselves that can be truly great, and we all have it.
Yeah. Well,
And
and that they opened up that discussion. You're not just whatever your feudal status was, whatever rank you have or something like that. Or you're not just a Catholic or now a Quaker or whatever. That all these um, um, labels
mm,
so confined to human beings. And so it really, if you kind of go to their literature, they're really trying to, it's kind of like a new day for them to be able to look afresh at not only what you are, but what your neighbor is, and we've all had that experience of just the excitement of getting to know somebody new, and that you, and so they become part of your worldview.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm.
Other people's thoughts.
Anybody else have some thoughts or questions? Have you, anyone want to address? Oh, go ahead, Diane.
I think that was a wonderful talk. Thank you. It just was so comprehensive. And what came to me, and I'm just playing with this, so I don't have an answer or anything, was Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The very bottom of the hierarchy of needs is safety and security. And it doesn't mean that people aren't living in horrible situations with nothing, that they're not magnanimous, because there's many people that are still magnanimous. But I think that many people that come from envy and fear, they're living on a first chakra, first level safety and security. And so they project out that they don't have, and they need to get rid of that person or that thing that is taking it away from them. And so I think what you brought up was the 7 things you brought up of how do we move out of envy, was with the base of that was self-examination. And I think that many times we are caught with people's rhetoric, and in our country, we're seeing that people are caught in that rhetoric of lies, and they're the bad guys, and we have to get rid of them, and we'll only be happy if we get rid of them. And the fear that's being terribly expressed in our nation. And so I think there's something around, you're exactly correct, that we need to do that self-examination, and to be able to live from a higher consciousness of looking at, where are they coming from? And even with all that's going on in the world right now, of trying to understand where people are coming from. Some you can't because they're sociopathic, but I think there's a real security thing that they don't have. And what you said is they're secure in themselves, or they've done your inner looking, or they have a spiritual basis, that there's something greater than, or that we are one. That people, when they're caught in their envy and fear, they can't see that, because it's them against us. It's not that we are one. So I see that the level, as you move up the level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I can see how the more that you do that and do self-reflection and understanding, the more magnanimous you can be. And I mean, again, the soul perspective versus the human's perspective is, if we are all one, how do we treat our neighbor? Or how do we do that? Well, if we're living from fear and envy, we really can't, because we're living from a place of deprivation, not enough. And I have to clear them away because I'm afraid. Those are just some thoughts that came to me.
Well, those are good thoughts. Anybody else want to say something about generosity? How do you become more generous? Yes, Mary.
Just thinking that really our parents and the people that we grow up with are our first teachers. And we will have times when we disagree, but we find communities where we share similar or very like qualities. And hopefully, they're good qualities, they're generous. But I can also see where groups bind together that are destructive, and
Yeah.
so
Mm.
really it's a hard thing, but I appreciate this discussion, and I think we're all like-minded people in this group. So we're touting our mutual respect for each other, and the gratitude and the learning we get. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Uh,
very helpful.
has anybody ever known someone who was able to rise out of a state of envy and into a more magnanimous?
State of envy. Now, I've met people who rose out of despair. And maybe that's an important distinction, because it's hard to understand somebody who's depressed. because it's complicated how people get bound into depression and despair. I think it really helps. Well, I didn't mention one phrase that's in my notes I didn't mention is the Dalai Lama's use of loving kindness. If you have a term like that you've heard of, and you might find yourself remembering it when you're in a situation. Look, I am so mad at this person, blah, 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 or they have just done something really disruptive. If you think about something like loving kindness. Now, if you asked me to give a definition of loving kindness, I couldn't do it because I find it so important, but in a way elusive. But that's where we have to have the courage to explore a new idea or a new relationship or a new experience. So that seems and there's magic in all of that. Just like well, if you're in a new situation at the university or something like that, and you encounter something that is so different, but you're right away you want to understand it better. So that's there's an openness there. The and of course, if you can bring in your metaphysics at some point, but we were trying to kind of keep this, most people aren't operating at the plateau of spiritual enlightenment. The plane of
If they were, they wouldn't have to worry about envy.
and
Sure.
then on the other hand, at the physical personality level, it's so complicated. If you start reading about illusions and delusions and sense perceptions that are muddy or something like that, you're not going to get anywhere there. You have to find a level of thought, and the notion of quietude, the notion, on the other hand, the notion of conversation. You may ask a question of somebody who's got a response that you haven't heard of, but is very, very helpful. So you've got to be open. In a sense, that's where the whole focus. I mean, I think it was brilliant the way these philosophers, and I've read most of them, but they said, let's just bring in a focus on a state of nature. What do we have there? Because nature gives birth to everything that exists. And nature, it's hard to see it, but it may be law governed in ways. So if you can recognize that, which is why people sometimes like to go out to a quiet place, to a mountain or to a pond or something like that, and leave everything, at least for an afternoon or something, behind, that may be a helpful way to open up your consciousness to something, to let something come in that you weren't letting come in.
For example, if you're in a state of envy yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What came up for me was that when I think of envious people, I think that there's a feeling of I'm not enough or I don't have enough. They've got it, I don't. So the envy comes that they have an empty heart, or if you have a full heart, you're giving out of love. I say if you have an empty heart and you're giving out of need. I'm going to give to you so you love me. And I think there's something around envy that if you're not enough, and I think that's where, for me, spirituality and that quiet comes in, because sometimes as a human, we don't have enough. I have to lean and feel the spiritual God working through me, or the divine wisdom to work through me and help me do those things. Because sometimes I may not feel like I have the energy or enough, and or that if you're always envious of someone else, that means that you're not doing the inner work of being enough for yourself. When you feel enough, whether it's through God, whether it's through just what you're doing, and you feel good about yourself, you can give more. But when you don't feel good about yourself and you feel like you're in a constant state of, I'm not enough, I don't have enough, someone's taking it from me, then what you're doing is you want to punish those that are taking it from you, and you're not taking any ownership yourself of your own journey. So those are some thoughts that I came.
Yeah. Mhm.
But one of my remedies is from time to time, well, friends I have, they're now at the stage of having great grandchildren. And look into the eyes of a 2-year-old or a 4-year-old. I mean, it's just an amazing experience. You feel so privileged because there's something so fresh and new
Mm.
about them that they're just at the beginning of having the opportunity to learn and figure out what it is they enjoy doing. And
Mm.
they have forgotten all those some of all of that. So it's really good to, I think, having around young.
Yeah. When we have a chance to look at a young person of so much promise, maybe it could help us remember that we had exactly that much promise ourselves at that age. And perhaps we still do. Maybe that would help. Kat, do you have something you'd like to share with us?
Do actually, I'm really glad that loving kindness was brought up, because when throughout the talk, that's something that kind of came up for me, was that the cure for dealing with envious people or envy within yourself is loving kind, or like metta meditation. And I pulled up the definition of metta. It's a cultivated mental state of benevolent, universal love directed towards oneself and all beings. It's not just an emotion, but a practice of actively wishing for the well-being and happiness of others. And yeah, that feeling of loving kindness has, I know it's helped me in the past when like I was dealing with these feelings of envy or like ill will towards my fellow man. Like practicing gratitude and practicing loving kindness really reminds me to decenter myself and put myself back into the place of love. Because when I operate from the heart space, I'm able to genuinely wish people well and like genuinely give more of myself in a way that is not possible when I am in that envious space.
Mhm. That's
Hmm.
good.
Natalia, I don't know whether you want to turn on your screen, but if you'd like to share something with us, with or without the camera, we'd love to hear
Hello,
your.
everybody. I'm afraid I can't turn on my screen today, maybe next time. First of all, I would like to thank Caroline for this very thoughtful, very informative talk. And thanks for all your ideas. And I agree with Mary that we are all like-minded people, and we stick to the fact that generosity is great. But what occurred to me is, I don't know, Carolyn, if you came across any resources that study the cultural background for generosity. I think that might be very interesting, since in my opinion, I have not read anything to that about that, but it seems to me that all the cultures, through legends, fairy tales, stories,
Mm.
they try and cultivate
Yeah.
that fantastic
Yeah.
emotion of generosity, emotional character or emotional attitude to generous people. On the other hand, such categories as envy and greed, they perhaps help us understand what generosity is, as it's always in literature, in drama, in history, the good and the evil, the beautiful and the ugly, the generous and the greedy, etc. But I think this is an immensely deep profound topic, and perhaps one talk can't cover all the aspects of it. But nevertheless, thank you so much for this, and I was so glad to join our group. Last time I failed to connect. There were some changes or misunderstandings. I don't know what happened, but I'm so glad I joined you today. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Renee. Thanks.
We're so glad you joined us too, Natalia.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You seem to be a very nice group. I'm so glad I'm here. Unfortunately, I can't switch on my screen. I'm not very well, and this is my second seminar today. And the previous one was very long and very intensive, very interactive. So next time I'll join, perhaps with the screen. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry. Do you know the topic for our next talk?
Yes, I'll be announcing that at the end.
I'm so sorry.
Coming
I'm so sorry. This is my first time. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Thanks.
no
Thanks,
problem.
everybody. Thanks. That was really lovely. I enjoyed it immensely.
Yeah.
Thanks.
We'll just spend a few more minutes, I think, on the topic. In terms of this idea of whether we've seen somebody arise out of envy, and also Natalia's mention of legends and stories, I sometimes find those to be very inspirational, and sometimes they're found in movies. And there's a movie of Mahatma Gandhi that's just called Gandhi, and it came out, gosh, I don't know, maybe 40 years ago. It stars Ben Kingsley. And there's a scene in the movie, and I don't know whether it was exactly envy. It was some other form of, maybe it was some form of negative emotion like envy, maybe something like hatred, but it could have arisen out of fear and envy. And it was a scene where Gandhi is fasting in order to get people to stop being violent, because he was leading a nonviolent revolution. And he always took it personally upon himself as being at fault if violence erupted. So he started fasting, and he was going to fast until the violence stopped, and even if it meant fasting unto death. We see a man in a state of great frenzy come bursting through the door, and he throws a piece of bread at at Gandhi's feet or somewhere on his body, and says, "Eat this. I can't be responsible for your death too." And so Gandhi asks him, "Well, what is the problem?" And he is, as Gandhi was born, also a Hindu. And the conflict in their country is between primarily the Hindus and the Muslims. And he says, "I killed a little Muslim boy, and I don't know the way out of hell." And Gandhi says, "I know the way out of hell." And he gives him a remedy of magnanimity. He says, "Go and find another little Muslim boy who is an orphan, who has lost his parents, and bring him up. Raise him as if he were your own son. And raise him not as a Hindu, but raise him as a Muslim."
Mhm.
And you see the enormity of this request, flash across this man's face to take in what Gandhi is suggesting to him. And then you also see this sense of a certain dawning of this light and peace, knowing that, yes, that is a way out. I can rise up somehow to that state of magnanimity. It's really beautifully done. So I highly recommend that movie, if nothing else than for that one scene. And there's many other parts that are wonderful as well.
What is the movie called again?
Gandhi.
Oh, the one with Ben Kingsley.
And Kingsley. Yep. That's it. That's it. Okay, well, what I'd love to do is let everybody tell us one takeaway before we leave, and then I'll let you know about next week's conversation. So who would like to give us a takeaway? Something you've like, got an insight into as a result of our conversation. Mary.
Constantly learning.
Indeed. Diana.
For me, it was being aware of my envy. You know, we can say, oh, we're magnanimous, but the truth is we all have envy. That, you know, someone gets something. Can I be excited that they got something? And, you know, people say, well, gee, I say I got something. They don't say they're excited for me. And I really try to appreciate everyone's accomplishments and stuff. And there is envy that comes up. And when it does come up, and I think it's a human emotion, to be aware of it and then work with it, being quiet or trying to understand where they're coming from, or just being grateful for what we have, and then really showing the excitement for the other person about whatever they've accomplished, and to be able to do that in a way of honest heartedness.
Great. Natalia, you have a takeaway for today?
Yes, my takeaway is great. I think that I should read and understand more about all these concepts. But what I think, and that was mentioned at the beginning of Caroline's talk, that nowadays generosity seems to be a little bit endangered. And that's why it makes this concept, this notion even more valuable. And Diana mentioned envy. That's what helps us to understand what generosity is. If it were not for envy, that generosity would be difficult to evaluate and to appreciate, as it is done in all the cultures, in all the traditions, etc. Once again, thank you so much.
Kat.
My biggest takeaway is that I need to return to my loving kindness practice. And this talk was a really good reminder for how I can not get stuck in the evils of envy, and how to feel from my heart again. So I'm really grateful for this talk.
Oh. And Carolyn, do you have a takeaway yourself?
Well, just that I think it was brilliant the way they found a way to get to something very important, and that is what were the qualities at work in each human being, and get away from labels like and dogmas and labels of this, that, and the other thing. They opened up an exploration that really said, in some basic ways, every human being is an individual with their own mixture of competency. So they can't do everything by themselves, but that they just opened up a discussion that led to the idea of individual freedom, individual rights, individual expression, to draw people out and with more self-awareness. That's what kind of struck me from this quick.
Beautiful. Yes. Well, I want to give you the vote of thanks myself.
What
I'm first.
about, wait a minute, Renee, what did you discover?
Oh, I was reminded of an experience that I had had in Nia when we were exploring emotions and deep feelings. And it was a very powerful experience of, we were free dancing to music, and our teacher was asking us to go from one emotion to another. And he asked us to, at one point, dance evil. And I first objected internally. Well, first of all, evil is not an emotion. Second of all, I'm not an evil person. So, I really can't dance that.
Mhm.
And then I remembered that one of the promises that we made at the beginning of this training was that we would always do our best. So, okay, let me just try this, even though I don't think I'm evil, but I'm just going to try. So I all of a sudden like just sense myself kind of shriveling up, and then from a standing position, I found myself down on the floor, and I was crawling along the floor on my belly, and and oh, I mean, there was such a constricted, tight ness in everything that I did, and I became so tight and restricted that phrase that I mentioned of last ate up himself, like I felt as if I became self-consumed. Like it was so tight, I would just eat myself up. And then my eyes looked out on all these others around me, and I started going for them.
Mhm.
Fortunately, he changed the music at that point in time. Had us go into something else like delight or something. But I mean, it was a very powerful experience, and it certainly showed me that there were some parts of myself that I was not recognizing
Mhm.
as having.
Yeah.
So it was very humbling experience, and also that I could arise out of it.
Yeah.
And then I could move on to something else, and that even that we are much greater as human beings than any one of those emotions or feelings, even the most terrible. There, we can be more, we are more than that, and we don't have to be stuck in it. So that was my very long takeaway. I'm sorry to go so long, but since you asked, I did want to mention for next week, we are taking up the topic of conscious immortality. Conscious immortality. What on earth does that mean? A wonderful past speaker of ours, John Powers, will be the presenter. He's going to speak from the theosophical perspective. And I think it's going to be another very insightful talk. I want to thank Carolyn for just giving us such a vast expanse of human history, human thought, and then being able to go from that huge, broad perspective to come right back down, 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 down to the individual level and us as human beings, and how do we live our daily lives? How do we deal with something like envy in our own lives? And how do we raise up to that generosity and that level of forgiveness, for example, that would be embodied in magnanimity? So thank you all so much for attending, and especially to Carolyn for
Thank you
giving
for
this
your comments and
beautiful presentation.
listening.
Yes, thank you. Mahalo.
Aloha. Thank
Have a
you.
great
That
rest
was
of your
great.
weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and
Bye.
mahalo.